Today I'm happy to share with you an absolutely winning line for white, and I know that you're gonna win many games with it. I'm Grandmaster Igor Smirnov, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Now, this opening variation occurs after the first moves pawn e4, pawn e5, and then we go into bishop c4, one of my most favorite chess openings, the bishop's opening, and then if black responds with one of the natural ways, either knight c6 or bishop c5, let's say bishop c5, they just play symmetric moves, you play knight c3, and if they keep mimicking you and play knight c6, we're gonna run into the position where you have an absolutely crushing attack. Just for reference, in case they develop the other knight instead, in case they play knight f6, I've got another video where I'm showing you how you can develop a very strong and unusual attack here in this, so you may definitely check this out later because it's a very common position to play. In this video, we're going to talk about knight c6, another normal casual move for black to play. Now, in this position, all of a sudden, instead of any natural move such as knight f3 or pawn d3 or anything like that, you're going to play the move queen g4, starting your attack right out of the gate. And the purpose of this move is pretty clear. From here, if black does not react, you're going to capture this pawn on g7, causing massive destruction because you're also going to win the rook, maybe the knight there in the future. So queen g4 is definitely a very strong threat. Now, what is black going to do about this? Even though there are a number of ways for black to parry your threat, but all of them have certain major drawbacks. For example, if they play king to f8, that would defend the pawn, but then the king loses the right to castle, and in a moment I'm going to show you how you can attack in this case. So that is clearly not an ideal solution. If black instead plays pawn g6, once again it parries the threat of queen takes g7, but it creates a lot of weaknesses here around where the black's king is likely to happen in the future, if black castles. So that also is not an ideal solution for black for sure. And again, I'm going to show you how you can attack there in just a moment. The vast majority of your opponents, however, will play here the move queen f6, which is a very tempting move for black to play. It defends the pawn on g7, but also it threatens queen takes f2. Therefore, it looks really appealing for black to play that move. Most of your opponent will play this, and you're going to greatly appreciate this because this is a losing mistake. All of a sudden, instead of trying to defend this pawn on f2, you are going to continue attacking with the move knight to d5. Another paradoxical move because you kind of accept this almost as colorless checkmate, but let's see what's the point. After black executes their threat, queen takes f2, you move their king to d1. Again, at first, it looks like, hey, this queen just captured the pawn. It's in the close proximity to your king, and looks super good for black. But let's take a closer look at the position. First of all, what can black really do now? It turns out that all these squares where the queen could possibly go to are under the massive control of the white's pieces, so the queen cannot really do anything, and therefore it was just a single check, but there is no real attack for black here whatsoever. Now let's take a look at the white's threats. You're still threatening queen g7, which will attack everything on the king side. You're also threatening knight takes c7, which will fork the king and the rook. It's also a pretty strong threat. And even if black parries those two threats, there is also a hidden third trap which your opponents are highly likely to overlook. Now, let's also figure out what can black possibly play here. One option, again, the funny thing is that in most of the cases your opponents will play very bad moves here. One of them is knight f6, one of the most popular reactions for black here, which completely misses the mark because it doesn't do anything against your major threat, queen takes g7. Moreover, it even makes it stronger because now not only you're attacking the rook and you're going to capture it with a check, but you're also attacking the knight here. So that's just completely losing, and it's crazy that a lot of the black players play this move knight f6. And the most played move of black is also a fairly obvious mistake. Very often they play pawn d6, hoping that you will somehow overlook this sudden threat to your queen, but in reality it's just a bad mistake because once again it does nothing against your major threat queen takes g7, so you're happily executing it and you're winning the game. That is just it. On the next move you're going to either capture here or here and win a lot of material. Again, we're going to take a look at that in a little bit more details in just a moment. So I'm just going to show you how strong your attack is and how likely black lose this game within just a couple moves. Now, even if they play the most stubborn move, king f8, which actually defends the pawn, there is also one more threat that your opponents certainly don't expect. You play here knight to h3, and all of a sudden it turns out that this queen on f2, which was supposed to be an attacker, in fact turns into a target for your attack because it's almost captured. Just notice that the queen's being attacked by your knight, And all these squares where it could possibly go to are already controlled by other pieces of white. Therefore, the only square for the queen to retreat would be queen d4. And now, since it attacks your bishop, you just defend it. And the queen is also nearly trapped there. It has no way to escape anymore, and it's enough for you just to play pawn c3 on the next move, and the queen will be captured. And it's really difficult for black to do anything because, hey, how do you get the queen out of here? There's no way, really. Let me show you one game here, which is really beautiful and illustrates a couple of ideas. Of course, black may play something else, but their position is pretty bad here anyway. So in the game, black played here bishop to b6. So black tries to provide this escape path for the queen. It would still be pretty ugly there, but at least it cannot be trapped after the move pawn c3. So white instead just play rook f1, another common move in this variation that serves two purposes. First, your pieces start to line up against this pawn f7, where they can possibly, checkmate an opponent's king within a couple moves. So definitely black should be concerned about that. But in addition to that, the other thing is that the rook, just in case, takes away this f2 square from the black's queen, so that the queen can never retreat there. Right now, this square is controlled by the knight as well, from here. But even if the knight, let's say, decides to join the attack and jumps to g5, the square f2 will be still taken away, and so the queen would still be possibly in danger, and maybe you're gonna somehow win it and capture it there in the middle of the board. Anyway, black played here pawn f6 to try to counter and defend this f7 pawn, but white just brutally broke through the black's defense with the move knight takes f6. And after black recaptured bishop h6, white is just bringing all of their forces into the attack, now hitting the king all around. Black captured, now rook takes f6, check to the king, and if it goes somewhere, then there is queen g7, attack of the rook cannot really escape. If it moves to f8, it's going to be captured, and if not, they're going to capture it anyway and checkmate black. For instance, if they try to move the rook, they can because it's controlled by your pieces, and it is checkmate. Like, very brutal attack that you develop seemingly out of nothing, but it's a very strong line, and it's not a trick, it's actually the line confirmed by Stockfish. Okay, now let's recollect these variations once again, just so that you remember them firmly and can actually use them in your games, and also I'm going to show you a few other ideas here. So white is still playing here queen g4, hitting the pawn, g7, black defends it with queen f6, then you bravely play knight d5, ignoring completely black's threats. They take here, you play king d1, and very often they play this move pawn d6. Again, it's the most played move in the position, so let's take a look at it once again. Many of your opponents will play this move exactly. This is a losing mistake, but they will play it anyway. Now you play queen takes g7, because that's your major threat here. Alright, so what is black gonna do here? Well, there's not much, because you're gonna either capture the rook, or you're gonna take here on c7, check to the king, and attack here off the rook. So basically, one of these threats will definitely win. In most of the games, according to the database, they play bishop e6, which again doesn't help at all. You can now capture here on c7, and then win this bishop on e6, and then maybe win the rook, so that's just so bad for black. Instead of that, maybe they're gonna try knight d4, somehow bringing the knight closer to your king and maybe hoping for some sort of attack. Now, of course, you gotta be careful, because if your bishop wouldn't be here, black would play queen f1 checkmate. But right now they can't, because the bishop covers that square. So that's not a real threat, but you just gotta keep an eye on that, right? So that you don't blunder checkmate in one. So after knight d4, if they desperately hope for some sort of counterattack, then a lot of moves for your winning here, but I recommend the safest approach, just playing pawn c3 and kicking this knight away, just to make sure that you're completely safe, you don't blunder anything at all, and you win the game with zero risk. And after the knight goes back somewhere, now you can gladly capture this rook on h8, also you're threatening queen takes g8, and after they try queen takes g2, hoping that they have a little glimpse of hope, some counterplay, maybe they attack a rook here. I actually would like to ask you to think about this position and to write it down in the comments below if you can find the simplest way for white to win. It's not the only way, because white is just having an overwhelming advantage, but it's the simplest way to win. If you can find it, write it down in the comments below, and if you can't find it, just, you can download the games, the link is below the video, or you can scroll to the comments and for sure somebody will find the solution. And to wrap this up, let's also figure out the best defense of black. Now, we already know that queen f6, the move played by majority of players, is a losing mistake. Instead of that, they're gonna do something to defend this pawn by either playing pawn g6 or king f8. More often they play pawn g6, so let's take a look at that move. Now, you don't threaten to capture the pawn anymore, and at the same time, you gotta be careful, because they have this bishop opposite your queen, and they threaten some sort of discovered attack with a move like pawn to d5. So what you're gonna do here is playing queen to f3, and you remove your queen from that potentially dangerous position, and simultaneously you create a threat of queen takes f7 checkmate, so you're doing it with a tempo. Now black will defend it, let's say they're gonna go knight f6, and now you play knight e2, which develops your knight, also covers that square d4 so that black can't go there and hit your queen, so knight e2 is a good move from every angle, and after black goes pawn d6, maybe they are threatening bishop g4, and if you're really concerned about that, you can easily stop that by playing pawn h3. But I don't really see the reason to stop that, because bishop g4 is not a threat at all. So I would actually recommend that you just ignore it, even though, again, if you're really concerned, you can play h3, but I would recommend that you just ignore it and play pawn d3. So that is basically your setup if black doesn't fall for the main trap here, okay? And even though black managed to escape from the immediate danger, their position is still very dangerous, because now black suffers for the weakness of all these squares, and on the next move you're gonna play bishop g5, and as soon as you do that, black is gonna suffer massively for this pain, and their knight is undefended and their king is also exposed. So this bishop g5 is a really bad threat to black. If they play bishop g4, they are similarly attacking move. You just move your queen away, and it turns out that bishop g4 didn't change a thing. Now all the black's pieces are somewhat hanging, you're still threatening bishop g5, so yeah, bishop g4 was quite a useless move. They usually take here on e2, which is great for you, because now in addition to all the other advantages that you have, you're having a two bishops advantage. So you recapture by the knight. Again, nothing really changes in the position. You still want to play bishop g5, or maybe even bishop h6. So your bishop can go either here or to h6. Both ways are pretty strong. They go here knight h5, another honestly meaningless move, because it's a one-time attack, but your queen goes back to f3 and renews the threat to f7, so knight h5 was, again, missing the mark. Now after they castle, you play bishop h6, taking advantage of these weak squares around the king. And since the rook has to guard the f7 pawn, they play knight g7 or something like this. And now you just start h4 and you start this brutal attack after h5, opening up the h-file. And you have a great chances to win this game within just a couple moves, really. Because as soon as you open up the h-file, you know, that's a door to the black's king, right? So you can bring your queen over there and checkmate it. And you're putting so strong pressure on black, you know, with this bishop, you're going to open the h-file. And yeah, that is just too overwhelming for black. Your king, if you ever need to castle it, you can always castle queenside, so it's in safety, nothing to worry about here. Therefore, even if black manages to escape from the main threat, the main trap of this opening, you still have a very simple way to develop a very strong attack. And if you want to get a more comprehensive training, then you're welcome to attend my free masterclass by clicking the link on the screen or down below the video, where you're going to learn the 3 main opening tasks for any opening, as well as how to easily compose your middle game plan after the opening is finished. Wishing you all the best, take care, bye.